So I'd like to open up a discussion scheduled for 7:20 PM. Zoning map change discussion for Wayne.
Thanks. So we want to discuss some potential changes to zoning map and text, sort of the next step of implementing parts of the sustainable Hampton plan and cleaning up some road zoning. So I want to talk about some 4 or 5 zoning map changes and then a potential text change. So the first one is sort of mostly dealing with weird zoning that we have. It doesn't really make sense. So this is Damon Road, which is right over here. Well, most of the businesses in Damon Road are, so here's Damon Road, curves around here, the interstate is right here. So Drossell's Funeral Home is right here, and River Run Apartments is here. So when you're on River Road, when you're on Damon Road, it's general business on both sides, but Drossell's Funeral Home, for some reason, is still zoned industrial. And I don't think burials are really industrial use. I'm not sure we really want to have industrial use right on Damon Road. So, you know, they've been grandfathered, they've been there for years and years. It just seems like a nice time to clean up the zoning and reflect what's really there, which I think is what we wanted. The other GI that's sort of bizarre is all River Run Apartments. I don't know how old River Run is, but it's 30 or 40 years. That entire site is zoned general industrial. And I don't really think it's going to become industrial. For the most part, this is symbolic. And what our zoning say, if you read our zoning, what it's saying in essence is we would like someday River Run to close their doors and be replaced by some sort of general industrial. And I don't think that's our goal. So the symbolic part is just saying we like River Run, it's an appropriate use for the site, the zoning should reflect it. It has some effects on them to the extent they ever want to do a project where they want to expand the building. River Run, as far as I know, hasn't done the expansion in years and years and years. So as a practical matter, it may not have any regulatory effect. But let's say the River Run Condominium Association said, can we give her an enclosed porch and expand the buildings out 10 feet? Right now, they have to go for a finding when it's perfect, appropriate use. So you have to do that. So, any questions on this one?
No, when we get to the more detailed, we're going to a more detailed map.
Yeah.
Just so people in the audience know, I'm not sure if people are, for those of you who are here for this part of the discussion, where we are with this is Wayne's bringing this to the planning board such that we can say, yes, we agree in principle, continue to look into this. This is not to the part where we're recommending anything to city council to make these zoning changes. This is the beginnings of a preliminary discussion with no recommendations coming out of this that are going any further than say, yes, continue to look at this.
Correct. So, second one, second one has some greater effects. You know, Damon Road is sort of mostly symbolic. This one would have some effects. So this is Con Street right here. This is the senior center, which is right over here. And so the idea this is from the senior center up to Northampton Market is right here. This area, and this is the World War II Club, and this is Murphy's Real Estate. The zoning keeps changing in this area. So the senior center is actually zoned residential. Northampton Market and one other property is zoned neighborhood business. So this area is sort of a combination of neighborhood business and URC. The senior center in some ways set this off because one of the reasons the city supported the senior center there was saying, wouldn't it be great to encourage an expansion of central business district in this area to make it more walkable. I'm trying to remember who of you were on the board when you approved the senior center, but one of the things that's really important to the board is the building be crowded right up to the street, and not be set back, that it has a cupola. They wanted to drop the cupola during when they were not having enough money, and the board said it's really important to keep the cupola as part of creating a presence in the street, making it more walkable. Con Street, as you probably know, is under reconstruction right now. It's getting wider, better curves, it's getting better sidewalks, and so it seems like it's logical, a continuous piece over here. Likewise, Murphy's Real Estate has already been, commercial, it's been there for years. We've had issues with the World War II Club, where they were permitted originally as a club. They've expanded the use, and they're really sort of basically a bar, which really isn't allowed by zoning. We've sort of said, you issue a special permit for that? To address if we sort of said long-term, it makes sense as far as.
Con Street is just a funky street zoning wise anyway. Is the intent to clean up all Con Street or this portion of Con Street such that central business, big picture, kind of has avenues to creep?
This area to me makes sense to say URC. It's a healthy mature neighborhood, we wouldn't want to change it. It makes sense to do URC this far. The reason we didn't go further down is this seemed like, frankly, from my standpoint, low-hanging fruit. This seemed pretty simple. This neighborhood business and general business, you could go a couple of different ways. So it just seems like it required a lot more study. This could all become a GB area, it could all become a CB area. There's different routes to go. So I think we have to address all cons. But one is that, it's the enemy of the good is the perfect. And I don't want to wait till we look at all of Con Street when there's some there that seems really obvious to do. And one of the reasons the central business expansion to me is really important is there are businesses who don't want to be right downtown on a second floor walk up and want easy parking. And we're seeing some pressure, less so during the recession, but some pressure for those businesses to leave Northampton and go in a couple of different directions. If you look at the Hadley crossing, a lot of those businesses were businesses that used to be downtown. So we're losing some of the businesses that don't want to be downtown in one spot. And then we've got pressure in neighborhoods as well on State Street and other areas. And so this seems like a nice relief valve to let downtown grow a little bit in this area. So I guess the short answer, Mark, is yes, we should look at the rest of it, but that seemed like a lot. Okay.
But this is picking up the Fruit Street's one that runs to the senior center.
No, so Fruit Street's right here. So this is really just one property thing. This wouldn't go all the way up to Fruit Street. And again, Stephen's right, these are horrible maps. This is sort of a start with. But the idea was one property
I
thing.
was just thinking about all the apartment buildings.
Right, no,
and
absolutely
residents.
But there are, to be clear, there are residences. So, right next to Paradise Copies, there's some, We've shot this a few other times. I think the result of going from URC to CB in places like this, where you already have a lot of businesses, is probably there's a short-term loss of housing, as sometimes the first floor unit turns over from housing to commercial. But the actually a long-term gain in housing as properties get redeveloped. It's worth investing in having a bigger building on this side. So long-term is probably a good thing. The Hungry Ghost used to be URC. This is one of the earlier changes we did for them. It makes sense for that. Questions?
This is a discussion that came up with ZRC. This is, what to do with concerts coming up for years, so I think it's a good time to look at.
Okay, so next one's Holy Street. So this is Bridge Road right here, Bridge Street right here. So there's the post office. Post office is URC. The coin place, the antique place, whatever that place is called, is URC. So we have central business goes down a little bit from Main Street. So this is primarily Catholic Church that's over here. So they have a parking lot on the south side of Phillips Place, and then all of this property is the Catholic Church and the parsonage, part that they own. And then across the street, and that's currently zoned URC. Across the street, there's areas which are zoned industrial and neighborhood business. And so we have, in this very small area, we have a URC area, we have a neighborhood business area, and an industrial area. And so again, it seems like a nice logical expansion of central business, simplifies things in that area. Clearly, one of the that started us down this path is looking at all the institutional buildings that are potentially going to come on the market. And there's different solutions for a lot of them, but this one seemed like the easiest one to rezone to the expansion center.
So the residential units would be like grandfathered?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So you could stay there.
Permanently or until sold?
It doesn't do with ownership. They can stay there forever. If they convert to commercial use, then they couldn't convert back. So they remain there until they convert. And we still allow residential, encourage residential above the first floor.
Yeah, but on the first floor,
First floor, as long as
if
they
they sold the building,
ownership doesn't matter.
Still,
Right.
okay. Gotcha.
It's discontinuance of the use. So third one, we had some discussions with Leeds Civic about this one. So this is Leeds. This is Main Street in Leeds. This is our brand new conservation area that we own on the Mill River. This is the waste recycling place. It's where they sell dumpsters or rent dumpsters. And this is the Catholic Church in Leeds. St. Catherine's, this is the first one that's closed. So St. Catherine's closed 4 years ago now, maybe. It's been in the market ever since. It's come up a couple times with Leeds Civic. They had specific people who wanted to rent the space. There was most recently a fencing studio who was looking at the space. They since just moved to East Hampton, but they were interested in being here. So nothing's happened, but sort of thinking about how do you know, it's a large, it's small for churches, but it's still a lot larger than a single family or two family home. So how do you get that building to be used in a way that it adds to it? And, you know, downtown Leeds isn't really going to support retail, doesn't have enough volume for it, but it could be a great place for other kinds of businesses. A fencing studio is a perfect example of those things. And likewise, the dumpster place, again, they're grandfathered, but in a dense village area, it's not really the best place to have industrial uses like dumpsters, but it's a great place to have a business. So if they ever left, it'd be great to encourage a use that fits more with a dense residential area. Questions? So these represent the institutional properties we're looking at. These represent the easy ones. The problem with most of the other properties we're dealing with, Smith College, Clark School, other Catholic churches, potentially surplus city buildings, is most of them aren't right next to commercial districts. So it's not necessarily easy to rezone it. And so one of the things we've been grappling with is what happens if the Catholic church next to the high school gets sold? It's not a good property to be a single family home or a two family home, but it's not zoned for commercial. It's not a good place to zone it for commercial. And so we've been playing with what are the potential language changes that could fit these uses for like these historical institutions. And this is just sort of a working approach. But one is thinking for historical institutions that have an old historical building, and I am going to show my age bias. You know, historic preservationists will say it's historic if it's 50 years old. But I have a hard time believing that buildings built in 1961 are really historic. So I, at least from my values, think, well, it's before World War II. So I'm suggesting, you know, a historic building is a building built before World War II. Used, which in quotes here is, was the so-called Dover Amendment, the definition of the state law for what's a religious or educational use. So we use exactly the same language the state has, saying, so if this was built as institutional use, it was used for that use for at least 20 years, and that use was somewhere in the last 6 years. And 6 years are arbitrary, it should be somewhere in the last 10 years. That we would allow greater use for the site. And what we're suggesting is the allowed uses could be any residential or back or corporate uses within the footprint of the existing building. So the reason it's important is we don't necessarily want medical offices, which are really high traffic, and we don't want retail, which is really high traffic. But if you have a 10,000 square foot church next to the high school, it doesn't make sense for a two-family home. Why not say it's 10,000 square feet, you can divide it up in any sort of residential use that makes sense. Do you want, I'm making up the numbers in some of the size of churches, but do you want 10,000 square foot apartments or 20, or 5 2,000 square foot apartments, whatever it is. For the most part, talking about the footprint of the building itself, we know a lot of these buildings would need elevators, some of them would need expansions to deal with seismic issues. So you might say it might be within the existing building with some exception for so I just want to go back to the reason for having some time limit, whether it's 6 or other years, is we don't necessarily want to go back in time to buildings that have been successfully converted. So for example, in Ward 3, there's an old school, which was converted 25 years ago to residential uses. That works really well, it fits in the neighborhood, and if the neighborhood wants that to suddenly become offices or something. So these are sort of institutional uses that are now going through the process.
Back to that one for a second. I'm not sure if I understand the language. If used for blah, 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 on land owned or leased by the Commonwealth or any of its agencies, I'm not sure, don't you mean, if this is private land, this is not.
So this is the language straight out of state law. So the Commonwealth or its agency is obviously state land. And that includes, for example, there is a property on Pomeroy Terrace, which the Commonwealth may be surplus at some point. So the Commonwealth does own some halfway houses that fit this definition. Its subdivisions include city government, so the city has anything that includes us. Or by religious sect or denomination or nonprofit educations. So we're not talking about private sector people, we're talking about institutions.
Before you pick up Clark.
Yeah, absolutely.
That definition?
Yeah, Clark fits as nonprofit educational program.
Oh, okay, so that's why I guess I was confused. So this is only for, yeah, this is not for private things that are private use right now.
Yeah, but it is included for nonprofit.
Right.
And the reason for this is like, there's a challenge. If I have a factory that I opened 150 years ago, and I can no longer make buggy whips, so I have to sell my factory, I have grandfather, and so the zoning's already pretty friendly for me. So the private sector people who have grandfathered buildings have opportunities. They can come before the zoning board and get a finding, and show the zoning board the new use is no more detrimental than the old use. It's actually a problem for church and religious institutions, because they're allowed to be built anywhere in the Commonwealth without limits. It means that they actually conform with zoning. So when Clark School is no longer usable for Clark School purposes, they have absolutely no grandfather, because they comply with zoning. And so that's where we have this problem, is the properties that comply with zoning, therefore have no grandfathering, but they're not really usable anymore for Catholic churches or school for the deaf or, public schools or whatever. So then the conditions that would go with this is, this is a carrot approach. This is saying we want to preserve these historic buildings. We don't want someone to tear down a great old church because the zoning requires it. But it's a weak stick to the stick of saying, but if you're doing this, if you're preserving the building, we want you to preserve it for all time. So we want you to give a historic preservation restriction. Historic preservation restriction is basically a property right. You're saying, we agree we're going to preserve this building forever in the future. And then it would still come before the planning board for site plan approval for all the normal stuff we look at for site plan approval, but not special permit. So an investor would know, I have the right, I could buy an old Clark School dorm, and I have the right to put any amount of housing I want in there, or in offices that are low traffic offices. But it still has to come to the planning board, and they work with you on preserving trees and landscaping, traffic mitigation, all those things.
Wait, is there a way to give them a carrot for historic preservation but not make it something that must be done?
Yeah, this is totally optional. So this would be over and above the current zone. So they could still tear down the building and reuse and comply to the zone.
But could they alter the building in some ways but still working to maintain the historic character and then find themselves in kind of the historic commission in a bit of a neither here nor there?
Yeah, so that's what this language is about. This is what makes, I like doing clear standards, but historic buildings, there's too many features that are important. So this would say, the historic preservation restriction, form acceptable to the planning board, preserving the key character defining features. So for example, when we sold the old fire station, the city maintained a historic preservation restriction, and we said we want the tower where they dried hoses, we want the roof lines. But we were happy with the garage bays coming out, we're happy with the building is expanded. So that would be part of the negotiation process with you when someone came for a permit, to figure out what are the important character defining features. And so they'd have to tell you up front, but yes, you could figure out this is important, this isn't. And then this is the steps for all of them. If you did this, as Stephen said, we're asking you to vote to move forward in the process. We're asking you to vote to go to the next step. So if you decide you want this, we're doing not legally mandated hearings, but just sort of informal public hearings, a chance for all the different communities to be heard. We would then come back to you. You would hopefully vote to introduce these things. They'll go to city council and then go through the normal process that we do. Sorry.
Any questions for, so this is not going, this is not the stuff you're doing with the tables where we're voting to send them to city council for, are we happy with the direction that things look like they're going and we want to continue that way?
This all makes sense to me. Like you said, it's kind of the streets that don't make a lot of sense. This cleans it up, streamlines it a little bit. It makes sense.
I think the future of some of these buildings and a real desire to infill and sustainable work on these houses.
When we started, this is, I I think this is part of, what, 2 or 4 weeks ago, when we had a discussion about what's the future of Clark
Right.
School.
Right.
Or some of the other parcels that we know Smith is looking to get rid of. So, I mean, I think,
And you know, we began a lot of dialogues. We met with the Clark School neighborhood twice, in general terms. We met with Clark School twice, we met with Smith College once, the Catholic Church once. We've emailed the River Run Condominium Association. We haven't yet done anything on Con Street. And so we're beginning that outreach. We need to do more, obviously.
And what's the feedback then?
River Run, we haven't heard anything, we're trying to understand it. Clark School and Clark School, I think it's mostly processing. We sort of, both Clark School and the neighborhood seem to get that right now the zoning might actually encourage people to tear down historic buildings. I think Clark School is Clark School's planning to sell to a developer, and they don't know what the developer would end up doing. So I think giving them more options is good, the developer take advantage of it. Neighborhood's very worried about traffic, so we're anything that allows more traffic, but they're also worried about tearing down buildings. And we all know that new development tends to have a larger footprint. You cover more of a site with a smaller building, and so there's certainly a lot of interest in neighborhood. Catholic Church is pretty non-committal, I think, when they're with that. At this point, the only one they've committed to selling is the one on Hallway Street. So I think actually the rezoning they like. The other ones for now they're not planning to sell. Oh, and St. Catherine's. The other ones they're not planning to sell in the immediate future.
do you actually want to vote, or do you want,
Oh, sense of count, whatever's easiest for you, doesn't matter to me.
I mean, I think the consensus is, just, reading the, comments,
Yeah.
we're in favor of the direction you're going.
Okay.
So, what's the time frame?
I don't know. September, October, or maybe October.
We're gonna come back to us.
Yeah. We changed councils at the end of this year, so I think things die at the end of the year, so maybe move through aiming for February public hearing, maybe a November public
Oh,
hearing.
right. So if you had moved it forward in December,
Right.
it would have to be acted on before.
Well, one
December
council
31st.
can refer to the next council. The more turnover in council, the less likely they're going to do that. January is organizational sensitive month.
So I think the consensus is, Mark?
Is this, you said this is kind of like the low hanging fruit, is that we're stopping for now? We wanted to try to get ahead of the curve as far as like Clark School and some of the churches and so forth, but, and then we'll kind of wrap it up, clean it up and come back in October, or before then you want to hit the higher fruit and take some other funky streets that you want to clean up?
There are other ones we're looking at as well. So we'd probably be in August, Carolyn, September meeting, might come back with more of these things as well. Separately from this, in terms of Clark School, the Elm Street Historic Commission is looking at the opportunity of expanding the Elm Street Historic District by cover Clark School. And you guys have an advisory role in that, you're asked to review that. So there'd be other parts of that that you'd be seeing
Right.
as well.
Okay. Where does Elm Street stop right now, the historic?
Elm Street's basically one property thick, church to church. So St. Mary's
Okay.
up to the church before the high school, I forget its name. It doesn't go up the roads. though.
Right.
The current map we're talking about is basically going up Round Hill, from Helen Hill's Chapel, where it ends now,
Yeah.
basically top of Round Hill. So it's mostly Clark School property or properties they sold in years past. So just one more thing.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to push it.
It shut itself off so you didn't see my last slide. But, I think I mentioned this. I know I mentioned this before. We had a grant from PVPC to look at shared streets, and so this is just an interim report. We're going to come back to you and discuss it in September. So I don't need any action. But the idea is, over the years, as cars drive faster and faster, we worry more and more about pedestrians. We've made pedestrians safer in new subdivisions by separating them more from cars. So many communities don't require sidewalks. We now require concrete sidewalks with granite curbs, which separate the pedestrians, which is great, but obviously creates less incentive necessarily for cars to drive slower. And there's a concept that's used in this country primarily in condominium projects, and then in Europe for some larger projects, where you basically share, where you don't build sidewalks. You in essence create a deliberate chaos, and you have bicycles and pedestrians and cars all on the road, but you're creating such narrow streets and curvilinear streets and chaos that cars are going below 10 miles an hour, or 15 miles an hour. The example I gave you before was, think about service vehicles driving through Smith College. They're driving on the sidewalk, but students don't get killed because it's pretty clear the cars are you know,
They've
not.
also got 5 speed bumps.
Yes, it's fine. Well, not on the sidewalks though. I mean, it's Smith College, you drive through the sidewalks and cars aren't getting hit there. So this is sort of the idea of, these streets tend to be, even though they're narrower and don't require sidewalks and granite curbs, they tend to be more expensive. So developers, honestly, love this approach. Because we require granite curbs and concrete sidewalks, for some developers it might be worth doing this. So this would probably be an option. This wouldn't be a required approach, but it might say to the developer, if you want to do this approach. You can imagine the co-housing projects might have loved this sort of thing. You know, certain developers would like this. It's probably not going to become the new model, but it could be great in some areas. So we asked PVPC to look into this and do background research, and that's what you have as the briefing memo. What we don't have yet, which is the much more complicated side, is taking something that's great concepts and putting it in a code format. You know, what would this actually look like? And so that's something we're going to work on in the fall.
Wonderful code.
Wonderful.
That's really.
Fun to say, isn't
Yeah, I
it?
know, I know.
Yeah, that's why we're doing
Granite
this.
curbs or wonderful, those are the two options.
Yeah, that picture on the second page.
It's excellent, isn't it?
I know.
Yeah.
I'm
We'll
not
take
quite
it all
sure if
out to
that's
get
a
wiped out.
before a kid gets smushed by
I know,
a
it's
car.
like, Jimmy, Susie, go play
There
in
was
the
a
road.
parking lot in the Boston.
All of you.
Yeah.
Totally.
But you know, a lot of us, maybe I'm older, but a lot of us grew up in subdivisions that were like this, you know, where cars really did drive very slow. I think it sort of changed over the years. But, you know, I used to live on Revelle Avenue. My campus was a dead-end street. You know, it's sort of, there's only 2 kids who live in the street, but it was the street that 17 years ago when you first moved there, and there were more kids, you could play in the street. It was just a short street. So how do you mimic that street?
Alright, so do you want anything on this, or this is just?
No, I mean, if you have feedback we should hear, let me know, but otherwise, I mean, if you think we're in the wrong path, let me know now before we spend more time and effort. If you think we're in the right path, then we'll just come back to it.
No, I think, this and the information we got from Nelson Nygaard, there's a lot of information that you've gotten in the last few months.
Oh, right, just remember me, one last thing. At your meeting on September 22nd, we're going to have EPA here to do a training on complete streets. We're a little worried it may be basic enough that it's something that you all know, everything that's in there, but I think it's worth doing just so we're all the same vocabulary and sparking discussions. That's if the budget isn't totally slashed for the Smart Growth Division EPA. But at this point, they come up September 22nd if they still exist.
We'll know on August 3rd.
Yeah.
And when do you leave for, is it?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
New Zealand?
Yeah.
Yeah, 6 weeks?
Thanks.
Excellent. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
Someone plug each other.
Wow, it's a cool word.
It's not bugging us. It's never bugging us.
I'm agreeing with Indy, it's bugging me.
Yeah, well, it's bugging because you're going to New Zealand for 6 weeks.
Right,
You can see them, they're filming The Hobbit, so you can see if you can find where they're filming The Hobbit, but you might be busy.